All right, credits at last. Okay, strap in because yeah, this is gonna take a while for me to talk about this game. Oh man, you're gonna try losing the playthrough, or you're gonna try losing that battle on your playthrough? I appreciate that. You gotta let me know. I'm curious. It's so 90s anime, and they left it difficult to tell if she's grown or not intentionally. That would be a very smart thing to do, actually. Very, very smart thing. Because it was kind of difficult to tell. Okay, alrighty. See if I can make sense of all of this. Okay, so Xenogears has finally been conquered. And overall, I gotta say this game is really, really nice. There's just so many things about this game that are really nice, but I think the most standout things for me are really the storytelling, and a lot of the writing in this game are really, really good. I have something said later on, which I'll probably just repeat, but this game kind of goes above and beyond any expectations that I've had for a JRPG, and as kind of depressing as this might sound, as a PS1 game, or a PS1 game, this kind of raises the bar of, you know, what JRPG should be. Which, you know, in most respects for me, my bar is always so low in regards to stories. So to actually play a game where the story is really this good is kind of jarring, I guess, because I'm kind of just used to playing mediocre JRPGs with mediocre stories, and they're just okay. They're all right, you know. They're kind of cool, but they're just okay. And this one was a pleasant surprise. Some things that stood out the most, I think I just basically mentioned. I think the writing and the story of this game really do just kind of go above and beyond any of my expectations. That was really, really nice. More things for overall thoughts. Disc 2 is definitely a sad thing to experience. Despite the overall decline in detail as the game progressed in Disc 1, Disc 2 really does show a completely different experience. It's less played through like a game and more like an epilogue experience. This music is crazy. I'm turning that down. And I really think that does encapsulate Disc 2 for me. It's not really... I mean, there's gameplay elements that are still in there that are from the previous disc, but it's more of just a storytelling disc. You know, they got to wrap things up. So, as mentioned in chat before, a lot of space chair. There were dungeons that I would probably go as far to say dungeons for the sake of just having dungeons. Tetsuya Nomura was in there. I can't really see very much else for disc 2. Let's see. I also have written here as like a theoretical question. Would you rather have a complete yet not as lively game? So, yeah. or a game that puts so much life into the first 85% of the game and then cuts away the majority of that life to allow for completion. And this kind of reminds me of some other sequences, because in this game it's basically the latter. There was a lot of oomph in this game for the first 85 or so percent, but then it just kind of like does a hard drop in what it's accomplishing. And is that a better experience than just having a fully completed game from start to finish that doesn't have that said drop off, but it is otherwise not as fleshed out and well done? So one of those more like little conundrum things, like there's not necessarily, theoretically, perhaps anything wrong with either of these. I don't know what's going on with this black screen. But which would you prefer? I don't know what I would prefer. But I have like an example here of like Mass Effect 3's ending. I haven't played Mass Effect 3 on stream yet. I'll get around to that someday. But like everybody hated Mass Effect 3's ending. And does that invalidate the rest of the game, or the rest of the series, the rest of the stories and things like that? What about Game of Thrones' endings? No spoilers or anything like that, but a lot of people were disappointed with Game of Thrones' ending. Does that really invalidate the previous journeys and things like that? So yeah, food for thought, I guess. I am like dropping frames for some reason. It's a good thing I'm on a black screen, I guess. Kyler says, this game made you dislike so many other games just because they don't hit the bar for story. I mean, for me, like you gotta just have that low bar, oh, my controller turned off. Anyways, there we go. Let's see. For story, was it satisfying? Absolutely. This story was shockingly one of the most well done stories that I've ever experienced, and it was extremely satisfying. The disc 2 dilemma does hurt the story a lot. Come on. But it's still a really well done story. I mean, yeah. So, woot. And I'm pressing buttons. Can't go past this. Let me see. Did it feel complete? It did feel complete. There are questions that I have, of course. Like, for example, Krellian. I think there should have been more done with Krellian before we get that final sequence. That does seem like it was very necessary to have. At the end there, it was just kind of, well, I guess I'll side with the humans, even though I don't really want to. And I never really had the intention of doing so, but I guess I will. I kind of wish we got to see a little bit more of that. How's the pacing? Pacing is kind of interesting in this game. Because I have here written down, the pacing is very up and down, but it is likely to be the best even flow pacing I've ever experienced, specifically in disc 1. In that, like, things are just moving and they're flowing together so well, and things are happening because that is what you could consider a natural progression of that particular sequence. But it just moves. It's great. Pacing's good. Disc 2 is kind of where I guess you could theoretically say the pacing in disc 2 is pretty good too, because it's just going straight to the point every single time and not wasting your time. So yeah, I guess you really can't say the pacing in this game is very bad, because it's kind of story all the time, mostly kind of. My some thoughts on the story. Some of these are written like 60 hours ago, so bear with me on some of these. Faye's aversions to fighting in the first several hours of the game seem justified, but overplayed. Most of the situations where he needs to fight, he is forced to. When he is not forced, he turns it down. This creates a very one note story progression with this character because we know he will be forced again until he gives up on his values. And this actually did come into play. It was a nice little twist, though, with the multiple personalities. But I think they could have made his character a little bit more interesting in that particular set. I don't think he needed to have this aversion of getting into a gear. It wasn't even that much of like a fear per se. It just, I guess it just wasn't an interesting thing to explore for Faye. Um, it would have been nice to get, I guess, something a little bit different. Um, I'm greatly enjoying characters exercise their intelligence. Whether it be poor or exceptional, I enjoy seeing these characters one up or get the drop on one another, such as Ramses outsmarting Bart's plan to take the throne. This actually doesn't happen too much, but uh, the moments that it does happen, again, it feels very organic and it's it's executed very well. Um, Let me see. The narrative has a way of flowing together. Each sequence of events is tied by successes and failures, which create the beginning of the next chapter. Nothing appears to be there for the sake of it. I wrote this in the beginning of disc one, and I guess I would kind of say it extends into disc two as well. And this kind of ties into the pacing as well, and some other. And I kind of mentioned it already, but I just really like how everything flows into itself. Um, it's just really nice. Like um, we start in a town and we blow up the town. It's like we need to leave this town. We need to we're not welcome here anymore. Then we go out into the desert and now we're just kind of like trying to survive, and we find this town and we end up learning about these pirates, and then we get captured by these pirates and we got to fight them, and then we go into this cave and then we have to use this pirate to help us out, and like everything just feels organic. It flows perfectly together, and it's great. um I have the game handles its factions extremely well, with the exception of the mysterious characters. Each faction gets a sufficient amount of world building and introduction. Um, I wrote this at the very beginning as well, and I think Krellion's, I guess, offshoot faction could have used more, but in the end, I guess we got to know Krellion's objectives and whatnot. So I guess I got what I wanted out of that, and so I guess that particular note just holds up for the entire time. It was nicely played, or it was nicely played out that we find ourselves wrapped up in Ave and get to see, explore, and get a feel for the kingdom. Then, after a pivotal moment in the story, we found ourselves in Kislev undergoing a similar sequence of events by learning about the place we are in. The game is letting us learn about the places in the world as naturally as it can. Again, I'm kind of touched on this already as well, but it's just nice how organic things are. And like most of the time when you go to a town in a JRPG or something like that, you kind of learn more about the town from NPCs. You never really learn about the town as you are doing main story um or uh going about things in there. Like I don't know, like it's usually a little bit of exposition first, and then you can just explore the town. But in this game, most, if not all of the major towns that we visit, there's a lot of narrative elements that are weaved in to where we have to go. And I found that very enjoyable. Sure, there's also a lot of information to get from NPCs and things like that too, but I found it very enjoyable in that regard. Several, if not all, of the bad guy sequences provide a lot of confusion. This is a common occurrence in JRPGs, but in this case, lots of names, titles, places, etc. That I've never heard of and likely never will for a long time show up. It's likely to show these sequences, or it's weird to show that these sequences of characters we've never met explain plans we have no idea about and discuss people, places, and things we don't even know exist. This was particularly kind of obnoxious because it's just kind of annoying to see the Gazel Ministry talk about the Animus and things like that. And it's like, I don't know anything about the Animus, man. Like, why are you telling me all this? Especially so early in the game. And then we don't even learn about that stuff until so late in the game. Like, I don't need to know all this, man. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I don't need all that. I'm just going to load into the game. Sound. All that other good stuff. Let me see. And then more on top of that, like, what purpose do these scenes have to the player and why is it important for them to see it? How is the sequence being used, or should say, how is the sequence being seen used to drive the main story forward? And is it necessary to listen to an enemy's plan if you don't and shouldn't understand what they're talking about? I guess, just more food for thought when you're showing stuff that we have no knowledge of and won't know any knowledge of for a very long time. What purpose is that serving to the player for us to see? And at least in my opinion, most of those scenes I didn't need to see until later on when I start understanding things. But obviously by then stuff is going down. But you can do flashbacks. There's plenty of flashbacks. Continuing down. The depth and complexity of the final reveals with Deus, Zohar, and the Existence are really interesting. However, a part of me thinks about how much development was needed to meld this into the story and how it could have been so much more simplified. It's almost as if it may be overcomplicating it when it doesn't have to be. I wrote this yesterday because the story is kind of complex towards the end there, specifically when the Existence comes into play. And I guess in a sense, I don't know if all that is kind of was necessary, especially for the game that we got in disc 2. I think they could have cut out the Existence. I think they could have trimmed down maybe Zohar, and they could have just focused on Deus. And sure, it would have been a very simplified story, but are we really missing all that much from the story by just simplifying it to Deus? Just more food for thought, I guess. And then I have here kind of like a little side project for me. How can disc 2 feel more complete? What needs to be cut or condensed? And so things that I would consider condensing would be Faye's multiple personalities, the id sequences, the flashbacks, Lacan, what's his name? Kim, like all of Faye's personalities or past lives and things like that. I do think that they could have condensed those quite a bit to allow more wiggle room within the story and allow more wiggle room in other sequences to bulk up disc 2 a little bit. The graph interactions, a lot of those were you could actually kind of say a lot of those felt forced. I think they kind of give justification for him following us around, but they really could have just cut those out and let those actually play out as they were, because those fights didn't necessarily need Graf to progress the story. Like, Graf being there didn't really add much other than, oh, Graf is here to make things more difficult for me. But if you just cut Graf out, it's like, okay, we're going to fight this boss and it's going to be difficult for me. And then the Gazel Ministry. I mentioned this before about all of their scenes, like what purpose are they serving, showing those to the player. And so I actually think a lot of those could be condensed or even cut completely up to a certain point. And so the structure that I'm thinking of, at least off the top of my head, I don't, again, 60 hours ago. So we start off in Lahan, everything happens essentially exactly as it does. We leave the town or whatever. We get our confrontation with Bart. We agree to infiltrate Ave and rescue Margie. Theoretically, you could remove the part where we get stuck below the sand and meet the sage guy. Theoretically, you could cut that out. So we infiltrate Ave, rescue Margie, and then we try to overthrow Shakan, which we fail. And then here's where my controversial cuts are. I think you could skip Kislev entirely. There's a lot of stuff going on in Kislev, but when I'm thinking back to the impact that Kislev has, it's basically Rico and Bart's like super gear at the end in disc 2 that doesn't really get a whole lot of explanation, but it's not really necessary. So I think you can cut Kislev entirely to add more oomph to disc 2. I also think you can skip everything related to the TAMs. There a lot of stuff goes on there. Some really nice character building with Ellie and Faye, but I think that can be shuffled around somewhere else. So then, after we try to overthrow Shakan and that fails, and we're skipping Kislev and the TAMs, we go straight to Billy and learning about the ethos. We potentially skip some of the more lengthy notes of Billy's backstory. We go to Billy's orphanage. We skip the Reaper ship. We go back to the ethos and uncover the assassins. We skip the ethos dig site, most likely. Then we travel to Shavat for the first time. Shavat goes under attack. We skip the Shavat emergency shaft dungeon. That was incredibly forced. And then we do the Nissan under attack. We skip the mausoleum dungeon. That was also just really kind of unnecessary. Then we move on to destroying the gates. And we skip the underwater dungeon because, again, we don't really need that. Then we infiltrate Solaris. I think all of that can stay the same. We escape Solaris. I think all of that can stay the same. And then we move on to disc 2, and then we've got so much more stuff to have happen in disc 2. Primarily with the removal of a lot of stuff happening in Kislev and the TAMs, but also removing several other dungeons. We could have gotten that dungeon where Ellie went in there and there were missile silos and things like that. We could have had a dungeon there where we got to learn more about that one civilization, the Zeboim civilization. There's so many things in disc 2 that just needed more fleshing out. Did my game freeze? Like the clock isn't moving anymore. So yeah, there's that. Might as well just plug the controller in. So those are my ideas for kind of fleshing out disc 2 a little bit more. For some of the writing of this game, many of the conversations, while written in a somewhat strange manner, are actually really good character conversations. I really like the characters' interactions with each other. I like the characters interacting with the world, to events that are happening. The dialogue in this game is pretty good. Might be one of the best written, if not the best written video game I've ever played. The game has a solid chunk of typos and misspellings throughout the game, though. And that's kind of a sad thing to experience, but I'm not, I don't like ding the game because of that. There's always going to be typos in games. And more often than not, it's actually kind of enjoyable to find those things. I will say that this game has probably had the most typos and misspellings of any other game that I've ever played, though. So take that how you will, I guess. Satan's speculations are out of control. Feels like he is being used as the crutch to tie everything together instead of natural paths leading to his conclusions. I kind of spoke about this who knows how many days ago. I really do think Satan is just kind of pulling stuff out of thin air, and it's just like, that's how it is. He doesn't say it in the way that makes it feel like he's just guessing. It really does sound like that is the conclusion, and we are basing all of everything we do off of the conclusion that he is making, instead of trying to figure it out. Let me see. The nouns in the game are just too much. Feels like there has to be a unique name for everything, which is unnecessary. This kind of ties into something I mentioned earlier. Yeah, there's a lot of nouns in this game. There's like, I don't even know what Sephiroth is. Still don't know what that is. Onto the characters. Learning about Satan and Sigurd's past may have been divulged too early. And then learning that they survived the crazy Red Gears attacks, which turned out to be id. I then clarified that it did happen too soon. I don't think I think that was misplaced. I don't think we needed to know that information that early. And I get that Billy was kind of forcing that out of them, but I think that could have organically been moved somewhere else, and it would have been more impactful. Because the way it happened, we weren't even thinking about Solaris or anything like that. If it happened closer to when we were dealing with the ethos, it could have been really nice. Like when we're in that computer underground, that would have been a great place to have it, even though Sigurd wouldn't have been there, but he could have been there, Faye's mysterious past is somewhat intriguing, and his amnesia isn't tapped into as much as I thought it would be. However, it feels like it's just a matter of time, and overall, while it doesn't feel contrived, I wish a better approach had been taken. I actually don't agree with this anymore. I think they did a really good job with Faye in this game. I've never seen amnesia done in this manner before, and they don't do the typical tropes with amnesia, which always bug me. I really do feel like they took a very nice, unique approach to Faye. They gave him multiple personalities. These personalities were determining what memories he actually knew. And in a sense, he didn't necessarily have amnesia. He just had multiple personalities with their own memories. And once he could, I guess, fuse with those memories, he could, or fuse with those other personalities, he could get those memories. So it was a nice take on amnesia. I don't like amnesia traditionally, but this game did it different enough that I actually do like it. And that's actually what I want out of characters with amnesia. Just don't do what they normally do. If you have to have amnesia, you better do it good. And Xenogears did it good. After getting shot down by the Goliath by Bart, I still have not encountered a reason why Rico's collar didn't explode when leaving Kislev. I complained about this several times. I don't understand. It's still on his character portrait too. Like, why isn't that guy dead? I don't know. The game handled Faye's multiple personalities in a very clever way. Multiple times throughout the playthrough, I noted instances of Faye speaking out of character, air quotes. However, once revealed about the personalities, everything fell into place for an amazing reveal. I don't think I have anything more to add to that. It was just great. Hammer betrayed everyone, and I'm happy that I called that early on. Yeah. Graf is Faye's father. You can't take that away from me. Yeah. Satan getting his sword, while not as impactful as it could have been, unlocked a new sprite and move list, which was not only unexpected, but executed nicely in combat. And I would just have to add to that, Emeralda gets a whole new sprite and a whole new move set too, which is, well, not necessarily like, well, yeah, like whole new animations like that. Like, that's crazy. That is absolute craziness. Good craziness. Character backstories seem to happen in the same arc that we meet the characters, few exceptions like Ellie and Satan. I think this was just a tragic thing of possibly cuts, possibly other things, but it really did kind of make some characters feel flat, specifically Rico. Rico, you get his story and he is done. You don't get nothing out of that guy anymore. Maria, very similarly, has that problem. Billy gets a little bit more, but it is kind of sad for the characters. Can you believe we're almost halfway? Gameplay, mechanics, and design. What gameplay elements stand out? The inability to save anywhere is unfortunate. Many sequences in the game are very lengthy with no way to skip. Pretty self-explanatory. I know this is a PS1 game. I don't know if there's any PS1 games out there that let you save anywhere. But I'm always on the lookout for games that are old, that kind of, I don't want to say revolutionize, but they do things that are a little bit outside of the box of what's normally done. So I like to appreciate those things. And you know, if they don't do typical things, I'd like to point out some stuff that they could have done to make things a little bit better. You know, if you're not going to let us skip the dialogue, let us save anywhere, I guess. The Kislev Gear Fighting Tournament combat was a nice addition, but completely unnecessary. Normal gear fighting would have been sufficient. This is something that I think could have been cut and more development time to other things to flesh out Disc 2. It could have been used for. Additionally, the chasing after Vandercom scenes, the part where like it's like this like side scroller, but you can kind of go forward, and we were chasing after a ship, and then you know id showed up, blah blah blah, this and that. They could have cut that part out too. In the very end dungeon where we're going through, I guess like that tube, and there's those lasers, and I gotta dodge them. You cut that out. Give me some more fleshed out stuff, you know. Being unable to walk through doors while characters are talking is annoying. I don't gotta expand on that anymore. Jumping is a curious addition in the game that I'm not sure really deserves to be there. That's another one of those things. Like, is jumping really necessary in this game? What do we use? Let me rephrase. What functions does the game currently use jumping for that can't be done without jumping? It kind of just feels like jumping may have been used to add another dimension to the game, but again, when I'm trying to think of what other ways I could do to fix Disc 2, getting rid of the height challenges that jumping provides theoretically can add a lot more development time to Disc 2, presumably. Can't change out party members except by going to either specific locations, such as inns or those little blue things, blue save points, or specific characters at specific moments in the story, such as Hammer. This was extremely obnoxious, and I'm not a fan of this whatsoever. Let me carry around all my party members with me. Let me swap them out whenever I want to. You know, if you don't want to let me do it in combat, that's great. But when I'm outside of combat, I should be able to swap out party members whenever I want. Based on conversations from chat and potentially from the uneven nature of how leveling works, I'm led to believe leveling up rewards random stat ups. If that is correct, I'm unsure whether this type of system is an acceptable one. Which it just kind of leads to questions of, what does random stats encourage? How does it affect the difficulty of the game? How does the system itself benefit or assist the other systems in the game? You don't necessarily have to code in every level stat ups, but if you're, I guess it would just be nice to have an explanation design-wise, game design-wise, of why random stat ups is a thing versus some other method. Is it easier to code? Is it less development time? You know, just food for thought, I guess. And then the last gameplay element that stands out, Satan is OP. In combat, combat reminds me of Sands of Destruction, which was very enjoyable. I like Sands of Destruction, and I could see the similarities. I think I read somewhere, or someone said something in chat, that developers that worked on Xenogears also worked on Sands of Destruction, so I can see the similarities, I guess. Death blows are super interesting. Assuming there are enough of them, it could keep combat fresh. However, the downside is that alternating between death blows doesn't seem to be a strategy because they get more powerful depending on how many buttons are pressed. I thought that was a very tragic thing, because it would be nice if I could just use square X or triangle X and do a similar amount of damage as 4 triangles and X. Like allowing for the variation in animations, it would just be kind of cool that I could just choose whichever one I want. And I do get that, you know, they want you to build up in power. I just think the reward of having multiple attacks is just nice. And on top of that, they actually built upon that in a very interesting way towards the end, where they made 4 death blows ether attacks. If they made some other death blows have some status effects percentages added onto them or something like that, and that would really encourage people to use different attacks for different situations instead of using the very bottom of the list, essentially. You can pull AP to presumably do a series of combos from the menu. Doesn't seem very good at first glance. I forgot to do this a long time ago, but yeah, there's this system where like you can build up AP, and then there's this combo system on ground that you can like select a bunch of death blows and use them. And I never got around to using that, but I wanted to and I forgot. So life is hard. But I did use one. I selected combo. I had like 3 or whatever, and I used one. And it doesn't seem very good. But it could be amazing. I don't know. Let me see. There's an interesting mystery in discovering which new death blows need to be, or need what for leveling. I like it even if it could be more transparent. I think it's really cool, you know, like I can go to Faye, because Faye probably needs a lot, you know, and it's like I have a bunch of death blows here, and then I have 4 other ones that I need to learn. And so I need to find out which buttons I need more of. And I need to go into combat. I need to test that out, write down which ones I did, see what progress I made. I actually had a lot of fun doing that. And so I thought this was a very nice system. Gear combat is weird. And I think I'm going to stand by this. Seems strangely restricted for some reason. Fuel seems unnecessary as a mechanic. I don't know if I like fuel because it basically adds another health bar to you, and it just adds more restrictions that you probably don't really need in the game. I'd even add that I think this game has too many gear fights. I wish it had more ground fights. Because in my opinion, the ground fights are actually the more interesting fights. Possibly hidden mechanics such as needing to attack once the previous turn to use a triangle death blow and once the previous 2 turns to use square, which was later clarified that this is attack level, which lets you use more powerful death blows the higher the level. So thanks to chat, Hylor, and everyone else for letting me know that, because I had suspicions, but I wasn't actually 100% sure. Strangely enough, the gear death blow tier of damage is reversed compared to out of gear. In gear form, it seems more efficient to use attack level 1 death blows to optimize damage being dealt. I mentioned this a couple of times. It is just kind of weird. I guess you just gotta change your mentality, your process, your defaults, depending on which mode of combat you're engaged in. Stats, bonuses, and debuffs are immediately recognizable of what they do. While immersive, I don't believe I've ever came across an explanation. I've been poisoned once. I don't know how much damage poison does. I've been stopped once. I mean, that one's kind of self-explanatory for me. I've been camera damaged. I think that means I'm blinded. Maybe I didn't talk to enough NPCs, but yeah. Let me see. A lot of stuff flies around on screen that seems unnecessary. Yeah, there's like targeting reticules and lines and bars and more bars and things with lower opacity. There's a lot of stuff on screen for gear combat. It's a pretty busy screen. When it's a character's turn, the fuel counter below their name turns off. And I realize it appears on the this side of the screen or whatever, but it would just really be nice if I could look at those 2 spots instead of just that other spot. And especially because that bar doesn't actually tell me how much. I have to look below the bar to get the number. Could be simplified a little bit more. Let me see. Some characters can heal in their gear, but it doesn't heal the actual gear. I think it heals the pilot despite the description mentioning gear benefits. This is really obnoxious. I don't know if it's a bug. I know it mentions that there are whatchamacallit stuff. It restores gear defense. But if I remember correctly, when you're in the fight, it gives you the healing numbers, but it doesn't restore any HP. So that in of itself is just kind of obnoxious, and I wish they would have either fixed it or changed it around a little bit. Leaving the gear part, I probably should have moved this up, but if a character dies in combat, they are revived at the end of combat with 1 HP. I am super happy that is a thing. Very, very happy. Let me catch up on chat a little bit. Let me see. Phase aversion to fighting was sort of like PTSD. he just blew up everyone he knew. That is fair. That is fair. You think the wave existence would have been more in play in episodes 1 and 6 if they had been made? Also fair. The arena gear battles had more endgame. It's a mini game to unlock a lot of powerful items, and some of the challenges are tough in it. I just don't think it needed to be a totally separate combat system is all. I think they could have just used regular gear combat to accomplish that, and to facilitate, you know, more development elsewhere, I guess. Square got rid of their development time limit they had back then. Disc 2 would have been much better without the short time limit on development. I think you guys mentioned that before as well. I guess I'll possibly get into that a little bit later. Combos get higher damage multiplier the more you chain together, but it's not a lot. The main use is for bosses that heal a lot or have low HP rage states. Okay. And heals in gear restore gear defense. You have a defense down that removes that. That's entirely not very helpful. Alright, moving on to dungeons. My favorite dungeon in this game was the Ave Tournament. A fascinating design concept where a tournament is playing and you need to sneak into the castle with one character while fighting with the other. It's super interesting because the tournament is timed. So you can be pulled into a tournament fight while sneaking into the castle at what feels like any moment. I truly felt rushed and pressed for time, ignoring my impulse to explore. I've never encountered a dungeon like this, and it was just executed so well. There were so many doors and places that I wanted to go, but I knew that there were only so many fights in this tournament that I had before things started going downhill at the castle. So the game did what very many games fail to do in making me feel that I need to get through this as quickly as possible and find my objective, which at the time was saving Margie. And it was just really well done. I hope there's other games out there that do a similar concept, because it's just great. Annoying dungeons, the Babel Tower, jumping elevator section. Was that Babel Tower? Oh yeah, that's what it's called. The Shavat Tower, the tower that you climb up to get to Shavat. There were forced fights that you can't run from. There's platforming, which the camera does not facilitate very well. And if you fall down, more likely than not, you have to start all over, which means you have to do all those forced fights again. You have to make all those jumps again. I do not like that dungeon, and I never want to see it again. Let me see. There were actually no dungeons inflated by backtracking. Every dungeon was, for the most part, going forward. There were some things where, you know, I needed to backtrack to change a switch or something like that, like the final dungeon. But overall, I mean, in that specific case, it was because I forgot to go somewhere. I didn't go somewhere, rather than I needed to go back. Unlike in, say, example, Sands of Destruction in the very last dungeon, where you got to go through a bunch of random encounters to go to a switch, and then you hit that switch, and you got to go all the way back to the very beginning of the dungeon to hit a panel that switch activated, to go all the way back to the switch through those random encounters to activate another one, to go all the way back to the beginning of the dungeon. Like, that kind of stuff is super obnoxious, and this game doesn't do any of that, so I'm very, very happy about that. There's a lot of there's some practical dungeon design issues in this game. Basically, dungeons that don't facilitate the use of which they were constructed for. For example, the Kislev sewers. Why is it a maze? The Kislev secret mountain base that held Goliath, the gigantic flying super weapon or whatever that got shot down by Bart. Like, who builds a base like that? You know? Why is it a maze? So yeah. Some cardinal sins. Things that this game does that are just kind of super frustrating and could potentially just make you quit the game for one reason or another. Removing a key party member without sufficient replacement. This game does this a lot. And then I have here, technically the replacements do seem to arrive throughout the individual chapter sequences, and it hasn't really negatively impacted the game 20 hours in. And I would kind of extend that to the end of the game. But it's just one of those things where, what if I really focused on Ellie this entire game? And then they just removed her at the end of the game. Then what? You know? Do I get her equipment back? I don't even know if I got her equipment back. And so how is that going to get fixed, you know? I have another one, forcing the player to use certain party members. For example, Satan flew the Goliath while everyone else fought Graf. I was using Satan at the time. Sure, he needed to fly the ship, but I was using Satan. You know, put that thing on autopilot. And Faye being removed from the party during his coma. Again, like, I put so much time and effort into these characters that I'm using, and then they're removed, sure, for reasons that are explained throughout the story, and they may be justified, but it's... I am always of the opinion that I should use any party member that I have access to anytime. And so once I get that party member, they should be my party member. I always go back to Legend of Dragoon as the shining example. Hey, they kill off a character in Legend of Dragoon, and then they give me a replacement pretty much immediately. And yeah, that replacement is slightly different. He has his own little quirks and things like that, but his stats are the same, his level is the same, he has the same equipment. Actually, his stats could be slightly different. But like, he is still more or less the same character that I had before. And games just need to do that more. It's obnoxious. No value indicator or tell to determine enemy HP. This is just a card. Like, I don't think anybody else agrees with this for me, but this is a cardinal sin for me, because I really do believe that you should be able to see enemy HP. Period. Whether it's an item, whether you start turning red or something like that. It should be a thing. Now, granted, there are some enemies, I don't know if it's all enemies, but there are some enemies that hunch over right before they die. But it's not what I'm looking for here. It's like, oh, you're one attack away from killing this guy, or 2 attacks or something. It doesn't qualify for me. And the last cardinal sin that I have is backup party members earn less experience. Specifically, they gain 75 experience. Again, going back to, I feel like I should be able to use whatever party member I have access to at any given time. So in this final battle sequence, you know, I have all these different party members that I'm like, okay, I want to be able to use these guys to help me out in this final fight. you know, I need to distribute some of the damage. But, you know, like Choo Choo's level 78, 68. Maria's level 68. Like, nobody else is on the same length as Faye. And Faye I've had for the majority of the game, Satan for almost as much. And, you know, sure, you could say, you know, they're not that far behind. And sure, they're not that far behind. But I would feel more comfortable using these characters, like, for example, Rico, if they were on the same playing field as everyone else, because then I can use them for their strengths rather than, oh, well, they're just too far behind, so I can't use them. I don't have the option of using them anymore. So I want to grind that specific character up, which is not a solution, an applicable solution that should be used to make up for this. But yeah. You don't like that they remove party members without removing equipment, but it makes sense they wouldn't strip before disappearing. There's a lot of more modern games that actually do remove the equipment. And some of them even tell you like, hey, you know, we removed this equipment. And I really do think that should be a thing. There's even some games out there that when that character comes back, they will re-equip the equipment that they took off if it is not equipped on someone else. So you can get really smart with those kind of things. And in this game, it really should have done something like that. I do agree that it's not cool that like Ellie just takes all of her equipment and I don't think you get it back. And Captain Slaho says, nah, you never get Ellie's equipment back. Life is hard. Let's see. Levels don't matter that much at all in gear battles, and even on foot, it's more about your equipment. The less experience you think is meant to encourage rotating characters. I do get that, but like think about it. I guess on the opposite side of the spectrum, you wouldn't need to rotate characters if everyone was at the same level. Like, shouldn't the design be focused on letting the player use what characters they enjoy the most, rather than what characters are the most powerful or the most up to date, for example? That is just my design philosophy and how I think that should be approached. And one of the best ways to facilitate that is to let every character level up at the same time. Gotta learn the death blows sometime. Well, I mean, sure, but Bart doesn't have very many death blows. Billy doesn't have very many death blows, and Rico doesn't have any death blows. In fact, Ellie has no death blows. I think I learned like 4 death blows on her, counting like her very first one. I'm pretty far behind on those people. But, you know, if you're a completionist, then sure, sure. But that ends that particular section. I'm almost done. Hooray. On to the miscellaneous section. For sound, some of the music in this game is pretty good. I don't remember too much of it, but I've actually heard the majority of it, and what I can remember, it was pretty good. I don't think I got any complaints about the music. There were some mentions in chat that they don't really add too many new tracks in Disc 2, and a lot of them are kind of overused or used too much. I guess it never really got to the point for me where I was listening to the music and it was too obnoxious or like, oh man, I'm hearing this music again. But again, it's only my first playthrough. Voice acting. There was very little voice acting in this game, but of what I've heard, it was okay, I guess. It was, like I said, very little, so I don't really have very many sample sizes to go off of, but it was fine. For the graphics, character sprites, in particular inside of combat, are extremely well done. I was not I don't think I've ever played a game other than Sands of Destruction in this. And you know, there might have been, but I don't remember playing any other games other than those two that I just mentioned that actually do what they did to sprites. Like in Sands of Destruction, you kind of have a combo system as well, and you can like chain together certain attacks depending on how much AP you have, and each one of those attacks have different sprites associated with them. And this game kind of does a similar thing, but even more crazy than that is it kind of gives you a little bit more customization, because sure, you can use 4 triangles to get 4 different attacks, or you could use 2 triangles, a square, and then a triangle, and that in of itself is going to be a brand new attack, even if you're using the same animations. So that's a super cool just formula to build off of. So like all these new sprites and things like that you gain access to is super cool. Satan getting brand new sprite animations, Emeralda getting brand new sprite animations. Very, very cool. Lots of interesting geometry issues with edges not being aligned properly or sprites moving through them in a scene. Those are just funny things to point out. In a lot of newer age games, you actually don't see too many of those things. And I think a lot of those issues in this game just happen to do with camera angles and things like that. Vertices being like right on top of each other and whatnot. Replay value. I don't think this game has any replay value whatsoever, which is not a bad thing. I don't think replay value should define a game or anything like that. But I think if you play this game just once, it'll be pretty good. I mean, you could play it again to gain more familiarity with the story, but I don't think that's really necessary. For other, the game does super interesting things that are very unorthodox for games nowadays, let alone a PlayStation 1 game. And I mentioned this a while back, like when we first reached Dazzle, and the camera pans over Dazzle introducing the city while the characters talk about it. That is not a very common thing, and it was great. Or like when talking to most NPCs, you could still move around. That I don't think has ever been in a video game that I've ever played before. It's just like cool little things that you could do. You know, if you don't want to talk to that NPC, you could just run away while they're talking to you. And I have here, game has a good chunk of voiced anime sequences that are done very well. Only downside is they're much quieter than the rest of the game, and they aren't synced to English dialogue. I'd rather have the anime sequences than not, and so, you know, happy that they're there. Oh, for the very last section, if the developer is watching, there's a lot of greatness in this game. A lot of greatness. I don't think I would say this is the best game I've ever played, and I don't think I would say this is my favorite game of all time. But I would say that this is one of the best games I have ever played, and definitely one of the best stories and some of the best writing that I've ever played. I might even go as far to say that it could be the best writing that I've ever experienced in a video game. I can't remember all the games that I've played, so not 100% sure on that, but this game is extremely impressive, and that kind of it kind of shows in how ambitious it is, because it kind of is a cautionary tale. Disc 2 really illustrates why game development is both difficult and expensive. It's easy to, oh my gosh, airplane. It's easy to go in with a plan, but plans often change. Xenogears is very ambitious, and things should have been changed to allow for a more complete second disc. Whether the management at the developer or the publisher checking on progress and expectations, Disc 2 definitely should not have played out the way it was. Like I said at the very beginning, Disc 2, I'm not salty about it. It's just sad. It's sad that it has to play out that way. And if I were to think back in game development or at game development, I think in most respects there should have been things that happen that prevent this stuff from happening. You know, when you're a year in development and the publisher walks in and says, you know, like, hey, how's progress going on the game? You know, if they look at this game and they're like, oh, you're still working on, you know, this? Like, you know, you're releasing this game in presumably a year or two. You know, how are you going to get to the end of the game from here? It's those kind of checks and balances that I don't think happened on this game, or it doesn't appear that they did happen on this game. And that kind of sucks for the game, I guess. It's definitely one of the most developed stories in gaming I've ever experienced. Absolutely. And thanks for the protagonist not being silent. I think I might just start adding this on every single game out there that doesn't have a silent protagonist. But this game could have easily done a silent protagonist, and I would have hated every moment of it. So thank you so much. And then I also have, as difficult as it is to say, I don't blame the publisher for making the decisions they did to wrap up development. The game isn't as cohesive with its mechanics and its systems as it should be. And this kind of just points back to, you know, there's a lot of extra stuff in this game that seem to have gotten attention over other things. And I get that, you know, development can be kind of a linear thing. You know, you work at the beginning, work your way towards the end, and when you run out of time, it's like, well, crap, we haven't reached the end yet, so now we need to start wrapping up the end. But I again mentioned those checks and balances. You have to close the doors and say, like, all right, you know, you got to have this game done. And as a developer, as the director of the project, you know, as the people that are running the project, you gotta keep your ambitions in check to make sure that you're delivering a complete product. So the last thing is, it would truly be a fantastic thing to see Xenogears remade with the second disc fleshed out. That is what would give this game replay value for me. Is they could release the game as is and then just flesh out everything in disc 2 that needs to be fleshed out. And sure, it would be like a 120-hour game, but I would play this game again to experience disc 2 in a whole new fashion. I realize that's never going to happen, but at the same time, we're getting Final Fantasy VII Remake. Anything could happen. Duke Nukem Forever came out. Anything could happen. You never know. So, that is essentially the extent of my thoughts. Again, overall, this was a fantastic game. It blew my expectations out of the water. I've had very many criticisms of this game, but this game is phenomenal. It is very, very high tier, even with disc 2. Like, if disc 2 wasn't the way it was, I might be able to say that it could be the best JRPG of all time. You know, it just kind of blows my mind. And like, even with disc 2 the way it is, it is still very high up there. So it's just crazy to me, you know? I can't really praise this game more than I already have because it just does a lot of really nice things. And I'm happy with it. So I think that's where things are going to get wrapped up. To catch up on everything back in the chat, the composer went into the hospital or something during production. Oh, so that explains why there aren't as many musical tracks. Okay, understandable. That sucks. No replay value while you're over here on your 46th playthrough. I started thinking about that as I was saying there's no replay value. But then again, you know, I don't think Legend of Dragoon has any replay value in it either. But that's a game that I like to replay every year or two or something like that. So, you know, if you like the game enough, you're gonna go through to play the game no matter what. You missed a lot of little scenes. You didn't use many of the characters much. You didn't understand some of what was going on until it happened later. Yeah. It was kind of difficult to keep up with some of the more difficult. Let's use a different word. It was very difficult to keep up with some of the more outlandish plot points. Not outlandish in a bad thing, but just, you know, like the Gazel Ministry, for example. A lot of stuff was going on with them, and it was very difficult to keep up with how their plot was progressing because, one, I didn't know what they were talking about. Two, their plot sequences happened kind of sprinkled throughout like all the chapters and things like that. And so by the time you get to one, you might have forgotten the first one that you've already encountered. So that's just a tragic thing for that. You'd say it has good replay value? I can't disagree. I don't know. It could have good replay value. When I evaluate replay value, I'm looking for a different experience. So like some games provide New Game Plus. Some games have maybe like epilogue experiences or something like that. Some games change things around. Maybe they give you all items or something like that. As far as I can tell, this game doesn't have any of that. And so you're really just going to play the game again just to play the game again, not to experience something new, presumably. At first glance. Final Fantasy VII Remake was always going to happen though, since PS2 has been about the most demanded remake of all time. Yeah, but look how long it took for them to announce it. Like, when did Final Fantasy VII come out? 1990 something? You know, it's been over 20 years. And it's been demanded for 20 years. Legend of Dragoon remake, sequel, prequel, something has been demanded for a long time too. And we ain't got that yet, but I'm still hoping for it. Second playthrough makes everything much easier to understand as it's presented. New Game Plus almost always feels like an easy mode. You keep all your levels and items and just play through the game, the same stuff again. I actually appreciate that kind of stuff about New Game Plus because, like, am I really playing it for the difficulty? Or do I want to experience some of the new things that New Game Plus game gives you access to? And there are some New Game Pluses out there that do make the game harder. Trails of Cold Steel was an interesting example because it made the game really, really easy for like the first 60-70%, and then it got kind of difficult towards the last 30% of the game. And I was just like, okay, it's getting real all of a sudden. You love New Game Plus modes? I do too. I really do think that a lot of RPGs should explore the possibilities of New Game Plus. You think Sony stopped making their own games? They still publish, but not develop as far as you know? that depends on how you want to look at it. Because like Sony Santa Monica develops God of War, for example, and that's a Sony studio. So, yeah, I guess it's just how you wanna look at it. I don't know if Sony, the company, like Sony Limited, Sony Video Entertainment or whatever, I don't know them particular. Who knows? But okay, I do got to wrap this one up. So, yeah, Xenogears has been defeated. I'm looking forward to the horizon. So, I definitely appreciate everybody that's joined me for the journey. I will be wrapping it up here, and I will be back in the near future. Most likely Monday, but possibly tomorrow, to play something new. So, yeah. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it. Catch you next time. Peace.